Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching.
Quickly, oxygen, Lucy commanded, taking the newborn, who weighed only about 2 kilograms. The boy didn't breathe, didn't scream, and by all accounts was dead. Lucy, the baby, died. It died in her womb. Nurse Angelica looked at Lucy like she was crazy. Lucy glared at the frown nurse and repeated firmly, "Bring oxygen and adrenaline." Angelica reluctantly rolled the kivot to which the ventilator was already connected and gave the doctor a syringe with the necessary drug. "Now go away, I'll do it myself." Angelica shook her head incredulously and left, leaving Lucy alone with the blue newborn hanging in her arms like a rag. "This new neonatologist is crazy," Angelica said meaningfully as she returned to the table where the laboring woman lay staring blankly at one point. Leslie, the midwife, whispered back, "They say she's a magician. She can bring back to life things that by all the laws of medicine are already dead." "Oh, come on. There was no heartbeat on the ultrasound. It's been over 24 hours. In fact, I'm still alive and still here," said the woman in labor, still looking at the same point. A faint, uncertain squeak made everyone turn around. Even under the doctor's mask, you could easily see their mouths open in surprise. Only Lucy smiled contentedly as she gently placed the revived infant in the kivot. An infant who had not been alive for over 24 hours. "Put your hands on Aunt Naomi's head, Lucy." Grandmother Catherine carefully guided 6-year-old Lucy's hands so that they were over her neighbor's head, palms down. Lucy obediently held out her hands, squinting her green eyes with excitement. Grandmother, smiling patiently, nodded. "Now, as I taught you, think about God. Imagine that you are letting His power flow through your hands. Ask a saint for help. Say a prayer to yourself." Lucy took a convulsive breath. She felt warmth in her hands and her palms were prickled with needles. The girl whispered a prayer to Nicholas, the wonder worker, for health, and strange, frightening images appeared in her mind. This must be what the brain looks like, a whitish gray, mottled with deep, twisting furrows, pulsing, flashing, like thousands of lights. What is it? But no, that's not it. Deeper. Lucy closed her eyes and dove deeper. There it was. Some kind of gray, viscous mass. What's that smell? Lucy wrinkled her nose. "Did you find the source of the pain?" Grandma asked impatiently, leaning over Lucy. Aunt Naomi, sitting on the chair, groaned and wanted to grab her head, but Grandma Catherine grabbed it and put it back on her lap. "Be patient," she hissed, and Aunt Naomi obediently quieted down. "Grandma, there's a lump here. It stinks." Lucy tried to explain her vision. "Burn it," Grandma ordered. And Lucy began to burn it, slowly, carefully, millimeter by millimeter. The girl, who had no experience in healing, was quickly exhausted. She dropped her arms along her body exhaustedly and swayed. "That's enough for today. I'll finish it myself." Grandma took Lucy to bed and returned to Aunt Naomi. Through Lucy's slumber, she could hear her grandmother explaining her ailment to her patient. "Naomi, you have a tumor. It will take time for Lucy and me to help you. Just be patient. Don't give up. Tomorrow you'll rest, and the day after tomorrow we'll continue again. Lucy is very strong, much stronger than me. Everything will be fine." A tumor? What is it? The girl did not yet understand what gift she had received and how she could use it. Before she died, her grandmother told Lucy, who had become an angular teenager, "Lucy, our gift is unique. There are only a few like us on Earth. Try to use your knowledge correctly. Do not shout about it at every step. And remember that it's impossible to help everyone. Choose a path in which you will become the most useful." "Grandma, I can cure you," Lucy shouted, wiping her tears with her hand. "No, Lucy, don't." Grandmother shook her head negatively, taking away her granddaughter's hands, which she was about to put on her infirm body. Grandmother died without letting Lucy heal her. Aunt Naomi, Lucy's first patient, was at the funeral. She hugged the girl and said, "Such an injustice. She cured me, and then she got herself killed. But she didn't want you to cure her, did she?" "She didn't," echoed Lucy. "Who do you want to heal more than anyone else in the world?" Aunt Naomi asked sweetly. Lucy shrugged her shoulders. She wanted to treat everyone, but choices had to be made. Lucy couldn't choose, no matter how hard she tried. Of course, she knew she was going to be a doctor, like her grandmother. But what kind, she couldn't decide. Cardiologist, neurosurgeon, maybe an oncologist. Her grandmother was an ordinary rural general practitioner to whom people came from all over the county. Rumors about the miraculous therapist who raises cancer patients from bed quickly spread through the nearest settlements. I wanted to help everyone. Why can't she be there for every dying person? But then the balance would be very much disturbed, because if she helped everyone, the planet would simply stop dying. Grandma said that you should help who you can, and don't blame yourself for not helping someone. All that's left is to choose who to prioritize helping. A hard, scary choice. The further Lucy went, the more she felt that her gift was not a reward from God, but an exorbitant burden. The choice came to her on its own, unexpectedly and under rather tragic circumstances. At medical school, Lucy had a best friend, Selena. The girl is cheerful, easy to communicate, responsive and kind. Selena, like a ray of light, became the closest and dearest person for orphan Lucy. Lucy was immensely happy for her friend when she got married and got pregnant in the second year of her studies. Selena literally glowed with happiness when she stroked her rounded tummy, affectionately calling her future son Romashka. The friends together chose a stroller, a crib, things for the baby. They dreamed what a wonderful godmother for Romashka will be Lucy. But their dreams were not destined to come true. In the 8th month of pregnancy, Selena suddenly found herself in the maternity hospital with the threat of premature labor. Unfortunately, they did. As if it were a wake-up call, Sangelica's dull, lifeless voice sounded in her head. Chamomile is gone. Lucy dropped the phone to the floor and sobbed. If she had been there at that moment, Romashka would have been born and survived. But she wasn't. Who would let a student into the labor and delivery room? The realization of who she wanted to help more than anything else in the world came naturally. They wouldn't let a student in, but they would let a neonatologist in. Babies who haven't even lived a day shouldn't die. Lucy was convinced that saving small, fragile lives was her purpose when Selena, unable to bear the grief, voluntarily left this world. Babies should not die, and their mothers should not go mad with grief. When it came time to choose a subspecialty, Lucy said decisively that she would become a pediatrician and do her residency in a maternity hospital. Lucy placed a crying infant in the cuvette and breathed a sigh of relief. The entire team behind her instantly materialized, delivering the woman who was now, after miraculously reviving her baby, barely able to stay in the chair and calm down. They were preparing for a delivery with antenatal fetal demise, but by some miracle, the baby was alive. "How did you do it, Lucy?" Angelique asked in a trembling voice. Lucy squinted her green eyes and hid behind her back her still burning hands, which she had recently used to move over the tiny lifeless body, infusing it with life force. "It can't be. It cannot be," wailed Harry, an experienced elderly obstetrician, doctor of medical sciences. "I, of course, told about you that you worked miracles, but such." Leslie, the midwife, just stood behind her and clapped her eyes shut, unable to believe what had just happened. Only the mother lying on the chair, who just a few minutes ago thought that this baby was not going to happen, was crying with happiness and whispering, "Thank you. Thank you. You are a miracle." Lucy was silent. She watched as the baby, who now had a long life ahead of him, was taken to the neonatal ward for close observation. Finally, she smiled and said, "I told you, Harry, that on my shift all the babies would be alive. Even the ones you thought couldn't be alive, and you didn't believe me. I've seen a lot of things, but this is the first time," Harry replied discreetly. "You'll see it every time now. Babies shouldn't die and their mothers shouldn't cry," Lucy said, took off her mask and headed for her office under the astonished stares of her colleagues. "Nothing. There's more to come." Katie walked out of the doctor's office and sank heavily into a chair, holding her rounded tummy. Her temples were pounding. It felt like something heavy had been strapped to her head. "Not a survivor," came the voice of Sabrina, her gynecologist in training. In her shaking hands, Katie held a referral to the hospital that read in careless strokes, "Recommended termination of pregnancy due to fetal malformation incompatible with life." Katie pulled her cell phone out of her purse and pressed the first contact on the list. It beeped. "Hello, Katie. How's it going?" A man's voice asked anxiously. "Not good, Jack. Kiryusha has polycystic kidneys. No chance," sobbing, answered Katie. The man sighed heavily. "Don't say anything," cried Katie. "I know you'll say it's for the best, but I already love him. I don't know what to do, Jack. The situation is that he's going to die either in my womb or almost as soon as he's born, and I'm going to have to go for it. But my God, it hurts so bad." Katie could no longer hold back her tears. She screamed desperately into the phone, ignoring the fact that everyone in the foyer of the perinatal center at the moment was turning on her, not paying attention to the entreaties and excuses of the person on the phone. Pregnant women, clutching their round bellies in fright, tried to get away, as if afraid of being infected with a fetal malformation, and doctors looked out of their offices with curiosity. One of the passing doctors approached the screaming Kathy and, putting her arm around her shoulders, admonished her. "Young lady, why are you screaming like that? You're scaring pregnant women." Kathy looked up at her with tears in her eyes and said, "Scaring pregnant women? What do you think I am? I'm still pregnant and my baby is still alive." As if to confirm her words, a wave of movement rippled across Katie's belly. When she felt the movement, Kathy sobbed even more, hugging her belly desperately. The doctor gently helped her up and led the way. They went into the office and the doctor sat Katie, exhausted from grief, on the couch and took her smartphone from the table. Meanwhile, in the postpartum ward, it was just a normal day. Nothing much had happened today, and Lucy watched boredly out the window, distracted from filling out discharge summaries. Her wards are alive and well. Some of them will go home today, to their families, with their loving and loving mothers. If only it were always so. There was one thing that didn't give her peace of mind. Angelica, a nurse in the neonatal ward. The phone conversation Lucy had heard was strange even at first glance. Lucy was going home that day, and as she walked down the hallway, she heard Angelica's muffled voice talking to someone on the phone in the stairwell. "Yes, you bet. I've never regretted working here. Kira, there's a lot of food here. You pick the juiciest and healthiest, and you can drink their strength all you want. But the main thing here is not to overdo it, or you can be fired from your job if it runs out. Here you have to account for every drink. It used to be good, God gave and God took. No one and did not care. But now with everyone is like a piece of paper. I've got someone here to fix my scraps. Her name is Lucy. I feel that she's not an ordinary woman. She doesn't treat them with medicine. I think she's from the oldest family of Slavic whisperers. Okay, let's do it later. There's someone here." Angelica hurriedly dropped the call and went out into the corridor of the department, almost head-on colliding with Lucy. "Oh, Lucy, are you going home already? And I'm still on duty." Angelica ranted and hurried away. Lucy did not show her that she had heard this strange monologue, but again she smelled a strange, faint odor coming from the nurse. The smell of decay, the smell of impending death, or already accomplished. What could it mean? All night Lucy could not sleep. She remembered the facts that she'd noticed when she'd just gotten settled into her new job. Every time after Angelica's duty, several babies got worse, and in some cases the babies even had to be rescued. What is the worst? In Lucy's absence at the workplace, a couple of times even happened tragedies, but they, as cynical as it sounds, did not exceed the allowable percentage of infant mortality. Lucy really wanted to work without days off, but she couldn't reveal herself. Besides, Angelica was already getting suspicious. If the management found out that Lucy uses in her practice so-called unconventional methods of treatment, she will be dismissed from work with a wolf ticket, and she will not be able to save so many little lives. Lucy was distracted from her heavy thoughts by a phone call. "Yes, Ariana? To what do I owe the honor?" Ariana, squinting at Katie sitting on the couch, carefully choosing her words. "Lucy Mitrievna, I have a pregnant woman sitting here. She received the decision of the concilium. The fetus has polycystic kidney disease, incompatible with life. Could you examine the pregnant woman? Familiarize yourself with the decision, advise her. The whole PC knows you're a miracle worker. What if I did?" Lucy thought about it. She'd never treated a baby in utero before. "Ariana, have the woman admitted to the hospital. What's her name? When she's checked in, I'll go in and we'll talk and see if there's anything we can do." Ariana went to Katie. State your first name, last name, and middle name. Katie said in a colorless voice, still staring at one point. Lucy wrote down the patient's details on a sheet of paper and, promising to come back, dropped the call. Katie was lying in the ward on a bed in a corner a little farther away, staring aimlessly at the ceiling. The eerie reality of the domestic pregnancy pathology ward was that women on bed rest and women awaiting medical termination of pregnancy lay next door to each other. Katie felt worse. She put her palm on her stomach and caught every movement of her still alive Kiryusha. Tears trickled from her eyes. Yes, she could just refuse to abort, but to carry a baby who would die immediately after birth. No, she's not that strong. She can't survive that. Yes, it's still up to her to give birth to him now, but better to terminate his agony right away than to watch him go. It's an incredibly hard choice. It would be better not to have it, this choice. The door slowly opened and a tall young woman with gorgeous straw-colored hair gathered into a ponytail appeared in the room. Her bright green eyes traveled over the occupants of the room and her gaze settled on Katie. "Hello, Lucy." The two women in the room said hello. Lucy nodded and smiled. "Hello, girls. Would you mind taking a walk while I talk to your roommate?" Lucy gestured to a listless Katie. The girls rose from their beds understandingly and, quietly continuing their conversation, walked out into the hallway. Lucy, making sure they were away from the door, closed it and headed for Katie's bed. She looked at Lucy incredulously and stood up, putting her feet on the floor. "You lie down," Lucy said softly, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "I've been going over your papers, tests, and examinations. The diagnosis is very serious indeed, but it's worth fighting for." Lucy smiled, which made Katie frown even more, but she lay down obediently. Lucy gestured for her to unbutton her robe and, concentrating, put her hands on the woman's belly. Katie cried out as she felt a burning sensation inside her. She wanted to pull away, especially since she hadn't expected such an examination from a doctor. "What are you doing? Why is it burning so much?" "Don't yell or everyone will be here." "Lucy, and don't distract me. I'm trying to help your boy." "How do you know it's a boy?" Katie wondered. "I can see it." "With your hands?" "Don't shout," I said. Lucy repeated insistently. For several minutes she held her hands over Katie's belly, occasionally changing their location, frowning, shaking her head. Almost all the time her eyes were closed and the burning in her belly was becoming unbearable, and Katie groaned again. "That's enough for today." Lucy sighed and removed her hands. "I'll tell you what. It's a spontaneous genetic glitch in the fetal formation process. So 100%, even I can't cure your boy. But it's not hopeless. Ultrasound shows the water's gone, but I found traces of amniotic fluid. There's a lot of damage to the kidneys. Unbelievably bad. Now I've relieved his pain and removed some cystic masses. It's gonna take a lot of sessions. I'm gonna get him to a non-life-threatening condition. I mean, he'll survive, but he won't be completely healthy. His kidneys will remain problematic forever. However, he will live, with medication, surgery. Although after the birth, perhaps I will be able to do more. Some of my strength is taken by your body, particularly the myoma." Katie listened to Lucy with her mouth open in amazement. "Are you sure you're a doctor?" "Yes, I am a doctor," Lucy laughed. "But not only that. I'm a Kathy nodded obediently. When Lucy left, Katie felt terribly tired. Before she could even think about what Lucy had told her, she fell asleep. For almost 2 weeks, Lucy visited Kathy every day and treated her baby. Before she was discharged, the woman was re-examined, and Kathy's doctor, Anthony, looked at the results and marveled. "Unbelievable. No, really unbelievable. They do say that Lucy Mitrievna is a magician." Valentina Andreevna, taking off her round glasses, he turned to Katie. "What can I say? You have moderate low water supply, that is, the fetal kidneys are not working well, but they are working. There are still cysts, of course, but one of the kidneys is quite capable of supporting the baby. That is, the prognosis has significantly improved, and now there are no indications for termination of pregnancy. Your baby will live." Katie was overjoyed. When she left the perinatal center, she immediately dialed Jack's number. "Will you come get me? Or rather, for us?" "Sure, sis," Jack answered cheerfully. He was already on his way to pick up his sister and hurry to his garage, one hand holding the keys and the other clutching two weighty bouquets of flowers, one for his sister and the other for the wonderful Dr. Hope that Kathy had told him about. No, Kathy hadn't told him the secret of exactly how Lucy had saved her baby's life. She knew how to keep her word. Lucy watched from her office window with a smile as Kathy left the hospital building. There you go, another life saved, you could say. Lucy had promised Katie that she would attend the birth, and now all she had to do was wait. Suddenly, there was noise and stomping in the corridor. Her heart clenched uneasily. Lucy headed for the door, glimpsing through the window as Kathy was greeted by a tall young man carrying two bouquets of flowers. He handed one bouquet to Kathy and pointed her to the car, and hurried with the other to the entrance of the perinatal center. But Lucy didn't see it. The door swung open and Leslie, the second nurse on the neonatal unit, burst into the office. "Lucy, emergency. The newborn baby boy who was admitted yesterday at Nasanovis is in critical condition. Come, come." Lucy pushed Leslie to the door and together they rushed to the intensive care unit. The baby was blue and barely breathing. His little body was convulsing. "Anticonvulsant," Lucy commanded and immediately received a syringe of the drug from Angelica, who was already in the ICU. Lucy noticed that Angelica looked better overnight. Her black terry hair shone with a healthy luster. Her eyes sparkled and her cheeks blushed. Angelica grinned contentedly and looked like a cat that had just had enough sour cream. Lucy didn't seem to notice the change in the strange nurse, but now she was almost certain that she had something to do with the child's deterioration. "Now everyone leave the room. I like to work alone," Lucy said as she handed Angelica the syringe and casually placed her palm on the boy's chest. The child was turning pink before her eyes, but was still weak. "After. Everything is after. Save the baby first," Lucy said mentally as she worked her magic on the fragile body, chasing away thoughts of Angelique. Only when the boy, exhausted by the seizure, breathed quietly did Lucy calm down. She was all alone. Who to ask for help? Who to find out who Angelique was and what she was doing to the babies? Lucy scrutinized the baby once more and suddenly noticed that there was a barely perceptible mark on his chubby neck, as if from a puncture wound. She put her fingers on it and concentrated. Something black, sharp, cone-shaped piercing the skin, penetrating a vein. No, it doesn't drink blood. It attracts silvery shining particles of soul and sucks them in, taking not just life, but human essence itself. Fragile, fresh, pure. The kind that only babies have. Lucy pulled away fearfully. "What is it?" "Angelica, what are you?" Going home, Lucy glimpsed a bouquet of pink roses in a vase on the table in her office. She didn't ask the midwife on duty where the bouquet had come from, because her mind was on something else. Her grandmother had told Lucy many things when she was a little girl. When the gift was just opening to her, blossoming and unfolding like a beautiful flower from a bud. "There's a lot of unclean things out there, sweetheart." Grandmother methodically pressed the pedal of the old, darkened spinning wheel, carefully guiding the thread on the spindle with one hand, and with the other pulling out the gray goats down from the cudel and spinning it on the thread. Nowadays, people have forgotten that besides this world, there is another invisible one, where there are creatures with whom it is better not to quarrel, about whom one should not forget. Some of them can be kind to good people. Domovoy, Leshy, Kikamora, Waterman, Bannock, and some have such an essence that only harms people. Swamp and Chucky, for example, Babai or Nocturnal. Nightwalkers? Lucy asked. Yes, Lucy, nightwalkers, nightshades, the undead. They were evil when they were alive, doing all sorts of evil things, black magic. When they were alive, they ruined innocent children, and they continue to do it after death. They drink the life juice from the children, thus supporting their lives. Usually they try not to drink it to the end, but often they taste it and ruin an innocent child. Nowadays, the evil deeds of nocturnal women are called sudden death syndrome. Goosebumps ran down the girl's back. Lucy looked around warily, as if checking to see if the nocturnal was behind her. All the way home, Lucy was preoccupied with memories. She would have to re-examine her grandmother's book, a bestiary of all known creatures. Maybe that way she could find out who Angelica was. But not today. It had been a long day and she was sleepy. So much so that Lucy didn't even wonder where the bouquet had come from on her office desk. Lucy opened the door to her apartment and stepped tiredly inside. Marcus, the smoky cat, greeted her at the door, meowing loudly. "What's up, buddy? Did you miss me?" Lucy squatted down to pet her faithful friend, barely taking off her shoes. The door opposite opened, and the curly-haired head of a middle-aged woman looked out. "Lucy, I recently gave Marquise some food. He ate it all," reported the neighbor. "Thank you so much, Aunt Betty," Lucy smiled. "I don't know what I would have done without you." The lonely Aunt Betty fed the cat when Lucy was at work. She did this not only out of the kindness of her heart, but also in gratitude for healing her of her arthritic knee joint. In the morning, as Lucy was getting ready for work again, Aunt Betty looked out of her apartment as usual. "Lucy, are you up late tonight as usual?" "Yes, Aunt Betty, as usual," smiled Lucy. "Will you feed Marquis?" "Of course, go. Don't worry." Aunt Betty was about to close the door when suddenly she drew in a breath of air and wrinkled her nose. "Lucy, you're in a hurry? Do you have a moment?" the neighbor asked in a half-whisper. "No, Aunt Betty, not too much." "Come to my room, please," Aunt Betty said, looking around. Lucy was surprised, but decided to come in even though Aunt Betty often said she didn't like visitors very much. The roommates had gotten to know each other almost immediately after Lucy moved into the apartment. At that time, Lucy had just recently bought a one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city after selling her grandmother's house and taking out a mortgage, and was not yet familiar with the locals. Aunt Betty stopped her in the stairwell. "What an extraordinary girl is going to live next door to me. What power!" exclaimed the woman, confusing the dazed Lucy. "What are you talking about?" The girl tried to resist. "Oh, baby, don't pretend." The woman looked around and slipped through the ajar door to the new neighbor. "My name is Aunt Betty. I live across the street. I can see things differently than other people. And I see in you a power beyond measure, ancient, unique. You're alive." Aunt Betty's eyes expressed sincere delight, and she touched Lucy's hand gently, as if it were a marble statue, as if trying to feel something else that other people could not see. "You healed," said Aunt Betty, licking her withered lips, "and I know. That's why I felt your gift. God, I can't even believe I've seen someone like you in my lifetime. You're an amazing, rare specimen." Lucy hurriedly closed the door so that no one would hear their conversation and answered, "Do you really feel my gift?" "Sure I do," Aunt Betty laughed. "You can smell the energy from a mile away, and it's knocking me off my feet." "I beg you, don't tell anyone about this," Lucy asked fearfully. "I won't, of course not. I don't even tell anyone about me. Only those closest to me know." "I know what a bird mint is," Aunt Betty said, more calmly, removing the hand that had been groping Lucy. From then on, Aunt Betty and Lucy began to communicate. Lucy cured her neighbor's knee, and Aunt Betty wanted to see the girl's future, but Lucy prudently refused. Then Aunt Betty volunteered to feed Lucy's cat while she was at work as a token of her gratitude. Lucy walked into Aunt Betty's house, and from the doorstep she asked, "Did you feel something? Something wrong?" "Baby, this is the second time I've noticed that you smell dead. This morning, not so much, but yesterday it was hard to breathe. Not your death, and it's not right, like it's both dead and not quite dead. Why don't you let me take a closer look?" Lucy was about to say yes when the phone rang. "Lucy, can you hurry up? It's an emergency," shouted the panting nurse Nancy. "Yes, of course," Lucy agreed without further question. "I'm sorry, Aunt Betty, I have to go to work right away. Something must have happened." The girl staggered to the door, causing Aunt Betty to sigh. In half an hour, Lucy was there. Nancy ran up to her at once. Angelica had already finished her shift and gone home, and Lucy felt as if the ward was breathing easier. There was no foul odor, no feeling that someone was watching her and breathing down her back. But it wasn't peaceful. Walker's labor was complicated. The baby is stuck. He's in critical condition. Nancy reported on the way to the intensive care unit, trying to shove Lucy's papers. What kind of labor? She was supposed to have a C-section. Lucy asked in a daze, pulling on the robe the nurse handed her. "Well," Nancy faltered, Harry thought Walker could handle it and give birth on her own. What on his own? Lucy shrieked. There's a 5-pound baby on the ultrasound, and it's cuffed. What have you done? The NICU was light and quiet as usual. The silence was interrupted only by the methodical beeping of devices. In the civet lay a boy, a real hero, to which from all sides were stretched wires. His face was covered by a mask, and a tube was sticking out of his mouth, supplying oxygen to his lungs. Lucy approached the baby and put her hand on the civet. Asphyxia. How many minutes was there no heartbeat? Nancy mumbled something, and Lucy waved her off. Go, I got it. I understand, Nancy replied politely and left the room. The boy was heavy. It took some serious work to get the brain power back on. Her hands were burning and shaking, and Lucy was sweating, but the baby was doing much better. Lucy gently pulled the tube out of the baby's mouth, made sure he was breathing, and left the recovery room. Nurse Nancy was waiting in the hallway, shuffling from foot to foot. Lucy, how's it going? It's much better. Add an antibiotic. The tube could cause inflammation. How do you do that? Nancy asked in a daze. Never mind, said Lucy. Where's Walker? Ward 47. Lucy entered the room. She immediately recognized the mother of the newly rescued baby. The woman was lying with her back turned to the wall, crying quietly. Catherine, if I'm not mistaken? Lucy asked, sitting down on the edge of the bed. The woman was silent. You've endangered my child. After a few minutes, during which Lucy sat patiently by her side, the woman said, Catherine, your boy is fine. I corrected the mistake my colleagues made. I am very sorry for what you have been through. I apologize for it on behalf of all those responsible. But trust me, everything will be fine. I guarantee it. The woman turned around in surprise. He was barely pumped out. They told me he was practically brain dead. No, I did everything I needed to do, and the baby's fine. He just needs a little recovery, and he'll be with you tomorrow. Thank you. Can I visit him? Of course, I'll tell Nancy she'll see you out, Lucy assured the woman. Now she had to visit Harry and ask him why he was taking unnecessary risks. Lucy swung open the door to the head doctor's office without knocking, and the smell of Corvaline washed over her in a second. Harry was sitting at his desk, hiding his shaking hands and sighing nervously. Are you here to tell me off, Lucy? Harry asked, hiding his eyes. Sort of. Lucy sat back in her chair and put her foot on her leg. Why? Why what? Why did you let her into labor? Narrow pelvis, large fetus. It's pretty textbook, isn't it, Harry? Well, it's not that narrow, and she could have delivered a normal baby if she'd done her best. You see, Lucy, we're almost out of C-sections this month. Don't you want a bonus? Me? A bonus? Lucy flared up. What bonus, Harry? This is about life and health, and you're risking it for performance. It's just, there are no words, Lucy. I corrected your mistake, Harry said Lucy, and after these words, the head doctor visibly relaxed. How can I thank you? The man said in a trembling voice. I need the personnel file of one of our employees, Angelica. Harry stared at Lucy in surprise. Don't ask me why. I have to, Lucy said firmly. Harry sighed and replied. It will. Go to the study. I'll bring it to you myself. Lucy smiled, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, got up from her chair and walked out of the study. The bouquet was still standing, emitting a faint fragrance. Who had brought it? The answer didn't take long to come. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. Sabrina, the midwife on duty in the postpartum ward, opened the door. May I? Yeah. Come in, Lucy nodded, pushing her laptop away. There's a handsome man waiting for you downstairs, Sabrina smiled. He says he wants to see you in person. It's a bouquet from him. Lucy was interested. Tell him I'll be right down, she replied. When she got down to the lobby, Lucy immediately noticed a tall man who was shuffling from foot to foot near the locker room. His face seemed familiar. The man turned and seeing Lucy, visibly perked up. Lucy, smiling, he exclaimed, Did you get the bouquet? Yes, thank you very much. Very beautiful roses. You seem to know that I like pink roses, Lucy replied, walking up to the man. Despite her tall stature, She had to raise her eyes to look him in the face. I don't know, of course. I just thought you might like them. The man shrugged. I'm Jack, and the bouquet is a thank you for saving Katie's baby. Oh, Lucy said, a little disappointed. Oh, come on. Your son's going to be fine. Jack smiled and said, with my nephew. Lucy raised her eyebrows in surprise. Katie's my younger sister, Jack explained. We lost our parents when we were kids, and we were raised by an aunt, but unfortunately not out of the goodness of her heart, but because of custody payments. My sister and I have been together all our lives together, for each other. She's the closest thing I have to family. Her boyfriend, the father of the baby in Katie's belly, left her, so I'm gonna be an uncle and a father to the boy. 2 in 1, so to speak. Jack chuckled meaningfully. Well, Jack, I can assure you, everything will be all right, Lucy smiled. You're our good angel, Lucy, Jack continued. I didn't see you yesterday, so I came here today to thank you personally. I work as an investigator, so if you need me, I'm always at your service. Jack handed Lucy a business card with his phone number printed on it. I've written my personal number on the back. Call me if you have any questions, and I'll help you in any way I can. Lucy took the card and looked at Jack again. Handsome, I couldn't say. Tall, stately, with close-cropped blonde hair. He smelled of charm, charisma, vitality. It was obvious that Jack was a man of purpose and responsibility. Lucy said goodbye to her new acquaintance and returned to her workplace. As soon as she entered the office, she saw a thin folder on her desk. Lucy sat down at her desk, took the folder in her hands and began to leaf through it. At first glance, there was nothing suspicious. Angelica, year of birth, address, place of study, a little work experience in the district hospital as a children's nurse. Then she got a job here. At that moment, the perinatal center had just opened and needed staff. Lucy wrote down Angelica's address, place of study, and previous job in her notebook. After a moment's thought, she clicked a picture of Angelica's personnel file on her smartphone and closed the folder. Where to start? The main thing was not to draw attention to herself, not to reveal that she suspected something. We need to proceed carefully. First, it is necessary to find out at least what Angelica is in life. In life, why does she smell like a corpse? And does anyone besides Lucy smell it? I don't think so. The rest of the day passed quietly. Nothing else, thank God, did not happen. All the children were born healthy and strong, and by evening Lucy calmed down. A meowing Marquise and a thoughtful Aunt Betty were waiting for her in the apartment. Aunt Betty, hello, are you expecting me? Lucy was surprised. Usually the neighbor tried to retreat from the apartment as soon as she fed the cat, but this time she sat patiently in the kitchen and waited for her mistress. I can't leave, Lucy. I feel something bad is coming. Come on, Aunt Betty, Lucy tried to smile. Is it about me? Yes, Lucy, the neighbor nodded and sniffed. But today the stench is almost gone. It's gone. I guess the source wasn't there today. Lucy hesitated. Should she or shouldn't she tell Aunt Betty what was troubling her? She didn't feel threatened by Aunt Betty. She smelled of kindness, and she smelled of a pleasant, faint aroma of flowers. She's a kind person. Aunt Betty, you're right. I'm not doing well, Lucy said firmly as she sat down at the table. I'm confused, and I don't know where to go next or whether I should. No, I feel like I should, that I shouldn't let her get hurt. But how do I do it so that? Nice and quiet? Give me your hand, Lucy. Aunt Betty held out her palm, into which Lucy immediately put her hand. The neighbor closed her eyes and began to mutter something inaudible, squeezing Lucy's hand in hers now and then. After a few minutes, she opened her eyes and said, I see evil near you, ancient, black dead. I don't know what it is yet. I've never encountered it, but it's very strong. It's driven by instinct and survival at all costs. It follows you around, but it's independent of you. It doesn't need you. It drinks lives like we drink tea in the morning. It feeds on lives, pure and light, innocent, very fresh. It's not alive, but it's not dead either. I don't know what it is, Lucy, but I sense great trouble ahead. A lot of trouble if you don't stop it. It gets a taste for it and loses its fear of being discovered. It could ruin many lives. It's in the form of a woman with tarry hair. For some reason, this woman is all in white, although inside everything is black. Lucy nodded thoughtfully as she listened. I already know almost everything you've told me. You, Aunt Betty, have confirmed my guesses. Lucy briefly told Aunt Betty what was going on at work, without holding back anything about Angelique. Lucy's worst worry was that her vacation was coming up. She had hinted to Harry several times that she didn't intend to take a vacation, but Harry kept shaking the labor law in front of Lucy and saying that he would be ripped off if he didn't let someone go on vacation, especially such a valuable employee as Lucy. How many babies could Angelica kill before someone is there to save them? We have to hurry. Lucy has a month and a half to find out who Angelica is and neutralize her. Time moved inexorably forward, bringing Lucy's vacation. How would you like it? Lucy asked softly. She realized that the girl might not want to save the child conceived by her tormentor. I would like him to be alive, the girl replied. He is not guilty of anything. So he will be alive. Lucy smiled and stroked the girl's hand. Angelica, prepare the cuvette and everything necessary for the resuscitation of the newborn. Lucy turned to Angelica, who entered the room trying to behave casually. It's just a workflow. In this case, Angelica won't do any harm to the baby. Lucy had already found out that Angelica was only interested in healthy and strong babies, and professionally Angelica was not to be trifled with. So Lucy tried not to show that she had any suspicions towards Angelica. When the difficult labor was over and the small child went to the intensive care ward, and Lucy hurried to her office. The baby, and the newborn was a girl weighing 1 kilogram 150 grams, was out of danger. In the evening, before going home, Lucy decided to visit the girl and reassure her, to tell her that the baby would be all right. She talked to the girl, and when she went out, right in front of the door, she came face to face with Jack, who was also on his way to the same room. Jack. Lucy was surprised. Hello, Lucy, Jack said happily. What are you doing here? I came to interview the victim. I was in charge of the high-profile case of her disappearance. Now the maniac is caught. The victim is safe. Details to follow, Jack explained. Yeah, you see a lot of things when you work here, Lucy grinned. Maybe it's a little early for visitors. How did they let you in? Jack shrugged. Well, I'm a policeman. That's my job. I'll be quick. Just a couple questions. Is the baby alive? And you doubted me? Lucy raised her eyebrows defiantly. No, not you. You're a good angel, Lucy. May I call you Lucy? Jack smiled. Of course you can, Jack. Lucy smiled back and felt her cheeks light up. What are you doing tonight, Lucy? Jack asked. I'm free tonight. Lucy felt like she was still smiling stupidly. Suddenly, the door to the neonatal ward opened and Angelica and Leslie came out laughing and chatting. The room where Lucy and Jack were talking was right next to the ward, and they both stopped talking and turned around. Angelica and Leslie glanced at the couple and hurried toward the stairs, and Lucy noticed that Jack was staring at Angelica, frowning. Do you know her? Lucy asked, as soon as the nurses' voices had died down and they had gone a good distance away. I don't know her. I guess I thought I saw a familiar face, Jack answered and smiled again. Well, then I'll be waiting for you by the parking lot. Okay, I'll be going home soon enough, Lucy replied and hurried into the office. On the way to the office, the thought crept into her head that Jack could help her find out more about the strange nurse. But why was he looking at her like that? He's an investigator. What if she was involved in something? If she was on a case? How could I just casually ask him? It's uncomfortable to put a request on a person you don't know yet, especially on a first date. She didn't doubt that Jack had asked Lucy out on a date. Dim lights, pleasant music in the background. No, it wasn't a fancy restaurant, just a pizza place. But Lucy liked it better this way. It was a pleasant, heartfelt atmosphere, charming in its simplicity, its lack of pretense and desire to impress. Jack cheerfully told funny work stories. Lucy laughed at his stories. She knew that being an investigator wasn't fun, but Jack was careful to choose funny moments from his harsh everyday life to tell his stories. Lucy, can I ask you a question about your talent? Jack changed the subject abruptly. Lucy was surprised, but pretended not to know what he meant. It's okay to ask. How do you treat them? What do you mean? Lucy continued to play dumb. Lucy, don't forget I'm an investigator. Yes, I'm not a medic. I don't understand a lot of things about it, and I don't understand how your colleagues still can't see the obvious. What methods are you using? I consulted with our medical examiner, and my sister's baby's pathology is untreatable. But you did. It's probably to your colleagues' advantage to look the other way, because it's all about results. Don't think I'm being insulting. I'm just curious. Think of it as a professional habit. Lucy was silent and stared at Jack. She concentrated to try to determine if she could trust him. The smell. One must catch the odor. A good man smells nice, or rather his soul smells nice. Angelica smells dead. Someone smells rotten. Someone smells rotten eggs. Jack smelled faintly of green leaves and rain. It was the smell of a confident adventurer. There was no scent of evil in him. I can heal, Lucy replied. Not with medicine, with my hands. That's what I thought for some reason. Katie's been as silent as a gorilla no matter how many times I tried to get her to talk. Jack smiled. I told you my secret. Now can I ask you a question too? Lucy squinted playfully as she stirred the cool coffee casually. Jack smirked. You can. That nurse you looked at so strangely today, how do you know her? Jack's look changed in an instant. He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again and thought for a moment. I'm not entirely sure. So can I answer you tomorrow when I check my guesses? Jack finally said, by the way, do you happen to have a picture of her? Intrigued, Lucy answered without hesitation. I do. I'll send it to you right away. A minute later, Jack's phone beeped. The guy smiled strangely. Let's change the subject, shall we? I'm acting like an interrogation even on a date. Is this officially a date? Lucy looked at Jack questioningly, flirtatiously flipping back a golden strand of hair. Lucy, I wouldn't take time out of your day to just sit around, and I wouldn't take time out of mine either. Jack crossed his arms over his chest, and I hope there will be a second date. There will be, Lucy grinned. You haven't answered my question. The next morning, Lucy found herself in a high spirits. The evening had been wonderful. Jack drove her home, and they chatted for half an hour, sitting on a bench near the entrance, enjoying the coolness of the night after a sultry day. In the evening, Jack promised Lucy he'd pick her up from work and take her to the movies. There was a new movie premiering tonight. Market, as always, had his furry side to his face and was snoring amusingly, the bright sunlight shining through the curtains. Lucy stretched with pleasure and stared up at the ceiling. Was she in love? It was time to find a mate. It was inevitable. Their lineage must continue. I was distracted from my thoughts by a phone call. Nancy, herald of misfortune, my ass. Lucy, are you still there? A frightened voice shouted into the receiver. Yes, I'm just getting ready. I think it's still 7:30. Lucy answered calmly, getting out of bed. We've had an emergency. A healthy little girl passed away, literally just now. Just now. There's still time. I'm on my way, Lucy said briefly into the phone and dropped the call, grabbing her clothes from the back of the chair. In 15 minutes, she was already there. The girl was still pink and warm. Death had occurred just minutes ago. Angelica, tell me how it all happened, Lucy hissed, looking at Angelica's glossy face. She's full, you bastard. Angelica hid her contentment, hiding her eyes. Her gorgeous, resinous curls shimmered under the artificial light, her cheeks flushed, her skin glowing. Angelica stammered and mumbled something about sudden death syndrome, and Lucy gestured for everyone to move away and put her hand to the baby's neck. There's a mother there, Nancy explained from a distance. She promises to put us all up against the wall. The mother's the wife of a local government deputy. Don't distract me, Lucy said and concentrated. The little girl's soul was thrashing around in Angelica's body, trying to find a way out. She was still a thin thread reaching out to her lifeless body, which meant she could still be brought back. Hands on fire. We'd have to use the very technique grandmother had mentioned. Lucy won't give up her powers. She would simply take what Angelica had taken from her and put it back where it belonged. A thin glowing stream, which no one but Lucy and Angelica could see, came out of the nurse's nose and went towards the baby's body. Angelica howled and curled up. Her resinous curls faded before her eyes, her skin turning gray. Nancy, who had been watching the whole scene, crouched over to her colleague. Angelica, are you sick? Angelica pushed her away and rushed away. at the last moment glaring at Lucy with slightly cloudy eyes. "I'll have to catch a dog again and eat surrogate food." The girl lying under Lucy's arms moved and grunted. "What was that?" asked a dazed Nancy. Lucy waved it away and remained silent. She did not know what explanation she could think of for what had happened. The whole day passed as if on pins and needles. Angelica quietly left the perinatal center without saying goodbye to anyone. She had not even handed in her shift, just before the end of which the morning incident had happened. Lucy was already well aware that Angelica must have guessed that Lucy knew about her. What to do next? Where to go? She should tell Jack and ask for his help, but he's just an ordinary man. What can he do? Besides, Lucy didn't quite know what Angelica was yet. All right, now she had a date with Jack, and then she should invite Aunt Betty over and go through her grandmother's book with her. Maybe they'll find something together. Jack was waiting for Lucy in the parking lot, just like yesterday. He didn't look as carefree as he had last time, shifting from foot to foot and clearly nervous. Jack smiled demurely at Lucy and opened the door of his silver Solaris, inviting her to sit down. The new movie distracted both of them from their gloomy thoughts, and on the way out of the theater, Lucy and Jack were chatting casually, discussing the picture. Dusk and the long-awaited coolness had come over the city. It played with multicolored lights of shop windows and billboards, rumbled with the ringing voices of teenagers and car horns. The city was alive. Lucy and Jack got into the car, continuing to discuss the movie they had just seen. At one point, they both stopped talking. "Lucy, I can answer your question, but I'm not sure I understand what it means," Jack said and pulled a folder out of the glove compartment. He handed the documents to Lucy. Not expecting anything good, the girl opened the folder. On the first page, a picture of Angelique caught her eye. Dead Angelica. The girl was lying on the ground with her arms spread out to the sides. There were no visible injuries on her body, but the sight of blue lips and a pale, lifeless face required no further explanation. Her eyes were closed, and her disheveled hair was a very different color from that of Angelica, who had worked with her. It was much lighter, closer to blonde. An unidentified corpse of a girl. Lucy asked Jack what she'd read at a glance. Yes, it was one of my first cases. A girl's body was found in a vacant lot with no signs of violent death. The only thing we didn't understand was where a rounded human bone of unknown origin had come from in her throat. The girl was never identified. The case was closed before it could be opened, and she was buried as unknown. Lucy slammed the folder shut and thought. It had gotten worse. Now it was not clear at all what the dead girl had to do with the Angelica Lucy knew. "Do you believe only science, or do you admit that there is something that people cannot explain?" Lucy asked. "I believe my eyes first of all," Jack answered evasively. "I believe that you cured my future nephew. Then there is something else that I don't know, that my brain refuses to digest." "Then let me tell you everything from the beginning." Lucy looked at Jack. "Yes, he's an ordinary man, but he's strong, reliable. Together they can solve this mystery." While Lucy was telling Jack about herself, about her gift, about Angelica and her suspicions about her, she didn't see three bats nestled on the back of a bench in the square across the street. The square was empty, so the three bats instantly materialized into three young girls, one of whom was Angelica. The other two girls had the same tarry hair as Angelica and similar faces. "Is that her?" the tallest girl asked Angelica. "Yes, Kara. And that cop I was talking about. That Lucy has gotten in our way," squinted the third girl. "You're absolutely right, Lotta," sighed Angelica. "We need to fix this problem. I think we should go to the suburbs and visit the hospital where Angelica worked." Jack summarized after listening to Lucy. "What if there's someone there who still keeps in touch with her? She might have been told about our visit." Lucy hesitated. Jack smiled indulgently. "Navia, do you think she doesn't realize you know about her? The point of no return happened this morning. She knows everything now. What do you think she is? A vampire?" Lucy was staring out the window. The familiar, frightening odor of dead meat wafted from somewhere in the square. "I don't think so. Jack, let's get out of here. I have a bad feeling about this." Jack didn't argue. He quickly started the car and they drove toward the house. "She's not a vampire. I think she's a lot scarier than a vampire." Are you busy right now? Lucy calmed down on the road and tried to think about who Angelica was. I'm sure she's not the only one. I overheard Angela talking to her on the phone once. I don't know why I'm still too lazy to go through my grandmother's book. I'd have to invite Aunt Betty. She's a witch, not like me. I can only heal. I wish there were more of those just things. I wish there were more of them. I wish there were more of them. I wish there were more of them. Yeah, and overpopulate the planet, Lucy laughed. Finally, they reached Lucy's house. It was nearing midnight. Jack dialed his sister's number and told her it would be late tonight. Also, I have the key, so don't open it for anyone under any circumstances, Jack added for some reason. Lucy's misgivings had gotten to him too. Something vague, something incomprehensible was stirring in his soul. Some strange, absurd images came to mind, as if everything that was happening now had happened once before, a long, long time ago. Jack shook his head to clear the fog. They parked in the driveway and were silent, looking at each other. I have tomorrow off, Lucy said. Let's go to Angelica's old place of residence first thing in the morning and see if we can find out anything about her past. It's late tonight. Aunt Betty's probably asleep. Jack smiled. He was tempted to kiss the girl, but since she still kept her distance, he tried to restrain himself. The spark that ran between them at that moment could have charged his phone. Let me walk you out. I don't feel comfortable. Lucy readily agreed. Already at the apartment door, the distance was broken. The smell of green leaves and some inner strength emanating from Jack drove her crazy. Lucy didn't let him say goodbye. She pulled Jack to her and literally dragged him through the door, forgetting about propriety. The three bats landed near the entryway where Lucy lived. After making sure no one was around, they transformed back into three girls. He didn't leave, Lotta muttered frustratedly. Yes, we mustn't go near him, or he'll remember who he is, and then we'll be in trouble. Kira agreed. It's all right, sisters, we'll wait. We've waited for 1,000 years, we'll wait some more, Angelica assured them. And if he remembers, what then? What awaits us? Lotta said excitedly. And maybe we should just go far away? Kira suggested. She literally spat in my face. Angelica hissed angrily. She ripped my food out of me, almost killing me. I must destroy this stuck-up healer. It was dawning. Early summer nights are short. Lucy opened her eyes and tried to remember the previous evening and the night that followed. Had she really dreamed it all? Though Jack's sniffling was proof that it hadn't been a dream. Well, Lucy, what a gamble. I mean, she needs a date, but she's a decent girl and she did this. What's there to regret? Jack must have sensed that Lucy was awake and stretched himself. Good morning, beautiful. Jack, don't think I'm not dragging everyone to my apartment, Lucy muttered. Navia, what are you talking about? Jack grinned. I like you, you like me. What's wrong with that? Like is not love yet, Lucy smiled, rubbing her eyes. How does she look now? It's morning. She's not washed. She's not wearing makeup. You look stunning, Jack whispered, pulling her to him as if reading her thoughts. Half an hour later, Lucy and Jack were already driving towards the suburb where Angelica used to live. Before Jack had called his sister to make sure everything was okay, he called work, letting her know he wouldn't be in today. The hospital where Angelica had once worked greeted them with a dingy, narrow lobby. No, it was quite working, and there were even children's voices coming from upstairs. And on the only bench, two children, girls of about 3 and 5 years old, were waiting for hospitalization with their mothers. Only the hospital looked very old, obviously in need of repair. The shabby walls had been hastily painted over to make them look godly. The tiles on the floor had probably seen Stalin himself, and the workplace of the nurse on duty was an ordinary school desk, piled with papers, and was completely empty. Only a few kilometers from the city, and everything was so bleak. Lucy thought that all the hospitals had been repaired long ago, but this one had obviously been forgotten. Oh, don't look at it like that. A woman's voice sounded behind us. We've been promised overhaul for years, but there's no money, or a pandemic, or something else. Finally, in a month we'll be closed for repairs. We've waited for it. A full-figured young woman was broadcasting, smiling amiably. Hello, Jack and Lucy said hello. Hello, what's your business? The woman asked. Jack pulled out his ID card from his jeans pocket and asked, "Who can I speak to about one of your former employees?" "The superintendent, of course. Only he's in a meeting in the main building right now, and he'll be back in about an hour. You can wait here. Which one of your employees are you interested in?" "Angelica," Lucy answered. "Ah, I remember her," said the nurse. "Well, wait, the head will come and talk to you." "So who is to be registered?" the nurse said loudly, addressing to the waiting people. A mother with a 3-year-old girl responded to her call and came to the table. "Second floor," the woman answered carelessly, sitting down next to the girl who was always trying to run away and started to whimper. "I think her boy is in room 25. Lucy and Jack looked at each other, made sure that the nurse was busy with the registration of the child to be hospitalized, and quietly headed for the stairs. The nurse didn't even raise her head in their direction. The 25th room was not far from the stairwell. The residents of the hospital looked around at the uninvited guests, but none of the medical staff was in sight. Strange, it's never this empty, Lucy wondered. At the same moment, a short, pale-faced woman in a white coat came out of the room. The corners of her lips were pulled down, and her blue eyes expressed immense longing and weariness. "Mallory," Jack called out to the woman. The woman turned around. "Yes, who are you? Who let you in here without your robes?" "Excuse us, please," Lucy said softly, touching Mallory's arm. "Actually, we came to find out about your former colleague, Angelica. But I'd also like to examine your child, if I may. I'm a doctor." Mallory looked at Lucy incredulously. "I work at the perinatal center in the city. My name is Orlova Lucy Mitrievna. You may have even heard of me." Mallory's eyes lit up. "Yes, the whole region knows about you. Is it really you? Sent home to die. I heard that you do the impossible." There was hope in Mallory's eyes. Lucy walked confidently into the room and approached the thin boy of about 8 years old lying on the bed. He wasn't just pale, he was literally transparent. There were brown circles under his huge blue eyes without eyelashes, blue veins on his bald head, but his colorless lips tried to smile. "Hello, Anthony." Lucy crouched on the edge of the bed. "I've come to help you." "I'm dying," the boy whispered. Tears welled up in his eyes. "Not yet, not yet," Lucy said confidently, and touched the boy's head with her hands. She closed her eyes, frowned, and moved her hands over the boy's head, which instantly lit up. "Neuroblastoma," Lucy said, "metastasized all over his body, but it's fixable." She continued to run her hands over the child, and after a few minutes, a blush appeared on his cheeks. The brown circles grew paler, and his expression changed by the minute. Eventually, the strength ran out, and Lucy opened her eyes and removed her hands. "That's it for today. Take the baby home. Write me the address, and I'll come again the day after tomorrow." "Mom, it doesn't hurt," Anthony said dazedly. Mallory stood there with her mouth open, unable to utter a word. "Mallory, now tell us about Angelica," Lucy said to her astonished mother. All three of them left the room as the exhausted Anthony immediately fell asleep. Lucy assured her mother that he must be, and Mallory led them to the next room, which was empty at the moment. After catching her breath a little, Mallory sat down on the bed and began to talk. "Angelica and I came to work here almost at the same time, and we became fast friends. She was an orphanage, very kind, sympathetic, and she treated the children like a mother to each of them. We quickly became friends. Our ships fell at the same time. About a year and a half later, in one far from beautiful fall day, Angelica disappeared for about 3 days, and then also suddenly appeared, but came to work completely different. She had dyed her hair black for some reason, even though she had always claimed she couldn't stand it. She was distant and uncommunicative with me. On the same day, she wrote an application for vacation with subsequent dismissal. In a short period of time, sold the apartment and left without saying anything to anyone. I never heard from her again, although I tried to talk to her, but she kept waving me away. It seemed to me that the Angelica who came back was not the Angelica I knew. Another detail: Angelica wasn't alone. She had 2 twin sisters, a year younger than Angelica, who had also grown up in the orphanage and were also studying to be nurses. I knew both of them, Kira and Lada, but they were gone too. Lucy and Jack listened in silence to Mallory's revelations. Did the story make anything clearer? It seemed to confuse things even more. Lucy and Jack thanked Mallory for her help, agreed on the next session for Anthony, and were on their way to the stairs when Mallory caught up with them and said, "I don't know if this is important, but I think I should say." Before Angelica disappeared, a string of infant deaths swept through our village. One after another, 12 babies died of sudden death syndrome. Lucy swallowed convulsively. How horrible. Too bad she hadn't been there for those innocent babies at the time. God, how heavy the burden. How hard it is to know that you could have helped, but you didn't. It was as if Aunt Betty had been waiting for Lucy and Jack. A curly head poked out of the apartment as Lucy jingled her keys. "Lucy, is everything all right?" asked Aunt Betty sympathetically, and looking at Jack, she faltered, "Oh my goodness, where did you come from?" "That's where the smell in the apartment came from. I wonder if I'm crazy." Jack looked dumbfounded at Aunt Betty, then at Lucy, who also didn't understand, and then asked, "Do I know you?" "No, you don't," smiled Aunt Betty, "but you don't know yourself either." "What do you mean?" Jack asked. "Oh son, Lucy, where did you find him?" Lucy looked at Jack, found nothing unusual, and answered, "Aunt Betty, why don't you explain it in human terms? It's better in my place, I need you." Aunt Betty hurried out of the apartment, slammed the door behind her, and followed Jack and Lucy, wailing, "How marvelous, eh? How amazing. Two descendants of the ancients met in the modern world. Out of billions of people, they ended up next to each other. How could that be, huh?" Lucy let Aunt Betty and Jack through and slammed the door shut. "Aunt Betty, what are you talking about?" "Lucy, can't you feel it?" Aunt Betty waved her hands. What strength, what power, what power, the same energy. It literally knocks you off your feet. That's something only the hereditary ones have." "Descendants of what? Can you explain?" Jack exploded. "I can. Just give me your hand," grinned Aunt Betty. Jack obediently gave the woman his hand. Aunt Betty took his hand and closed her eyes. She mumbled something to herself, wrinkled her face, and her face stretched out, sweat beading on her forehead. At last Aunt Betty opened her eyes and murmured, "Your meeting was no accident. You dream, don't you, boy?" A gray-haired old man with a psaltery, a huge fire, endless forests. "You're a descendant of the people that a new religion tried to exterminate a couple thousand years ago." Well, new religion at the time. Pagan witches called magi, keepers of ancient knowledge and wisdom that had traveled through the ages, the strongest sorcerers. You were wiped out, almost all of you. "How did you see all this?" Jack asked incredulously. "Your ancestors told me." Aunt Betty smiled. "I'm one of you too. But I'm old. And I think, Lucy, I'm beginning to understand who Angelica is. Where's your book?" "Oh, you herald of misfortune. By golly." Lucy glanced frustratedly at the screen of her smartphone, which was ringing off the hook as Jack tried to argue with Aunt Betty about his origins. Nancy had gotten into the habit of dialing Lucy's number and yelling into the receiver like a lunatic. "Yes, Nancy," Lucy answered tiredly. Nancy's call was definitely not going to do any good. "Lucy, we're in premature labor. The baby is expected to be in serious condition. Are you very busy?" Nancy was surprisingly calm. "Victoria's on call today. She can't do it without me, can she?" "No, Lucy, it's very light. No more than 600 grams. I'll be right there." Lucy sighed. Setting aside the thick old brown book, she had been unable to start studying because of Jack's confusion. Aunt Betty looked at Lucy suspiciously. "Unkind call." "Oh, Aunt Betty, Nancy doesn't call for good reasons. I have to go away for a while, and you and Jack can start without me. Just get started," Lucy said confidently, stashing her smartphone in her purse. "I don't mean that, Lucy." Aunt Betty shook her head negatively. "You can't go anywhere. I have a feeling something bad is going to happen." Lucy glanced at her neighbor. "Of course it will if I don't go. The baby will die." Jack, who had been silent until then, took Lucy's hand. "Let me drive you. I've got a bad feeling too, like you're not going to make it." Lucy laughed, though Aunt Betty's and Jack's uncertainty for a moment passed over her. But she quickly suppressed the anxiety of being needed at work, so she would go. but time was of the essence. She needed to look at the book and find out who Angelica was, so Aunt Betty and Jack would take care of that until she arrived. No, it's a 15-minute drive. I'll be quick. You two start without me, because we have to hurry. If Angelica knows what I know about her, we don't have much time. We're dragging on long enough as it is. With these words, Lucy left the apartment under the anxious glances of Jack and Aunt Betty. How could she have known that at that moment Nancy was already lying staring into the pre-sunset sky with lifeless, eternally frozen eyes in the backyard of the perinatal center, and that Angelica, drunk on her vitality, was on her way to the secret lair the three sisters had chosen? As soon as Lucy turned the corner, heading toward the parking lot where her car had been idling for days, she smelled the familiar scent of dead meat. An uneasiness, bordering on primal fear, grew in her soul. She was alone here. As if by chance, there was not a soul in the park near her house, overgrown with lilac bushes and century-old poplars. And that's because recently, right behind their house, a new shopping center was under construction. The rumble of heavy machinery and three-story mats of workers did not dispose to a measured walk. The locals tried to avoid the square, which was not popular even before the construction. The parking lot was right at the exit of the square. Of course, Lucy could have avoided it, but she was in a hurry and decided to take a shortcut. But Lucy couldn't get out in time, no matter how fast she hurried. Suddenly, the smell became unbearable. She turned around and managed to see only two girls, very similar to Angelica. As suddenly, she felt a strong blow on her head and everything in front of her eyes went out. Lucy woke up in a cold, damp basement, sitting on a mattress spread out on the concrete floor. Her head was buzzing and her whole body felt unbearably weak. "I wanted to kill you at once," Lucy heard a familiar voice, "but a little taste of you is food. My sisters and I decided to stretch such a delicacy longer." Angelica, that's the name of the shell. Angelica grinned, stepping into the light that dimly illuminated the basement with a single dusty bulb. "Let me go for a while. I'm needed at work," Lucy pleaded. Even at that moment, the last thing on her mind was herself. "Without me, the baby could die. I promise I won't run away." Angelica laughed. "Calm down. There's no baby. I made Nancy call you before I drank her life away." Angelica leaned over Lucy and the girl turned away, unable to stand the stench coming from Angelica. At that moment, the door creaked open, and for a second an outside bright light burst into the basement and two more girls appeared in the room. "And these are my sisters." Angelica put her arm around Kira and Lada. "Who are you?" Lucy asked her bluntly, mentally praying for the repose of poor Nancy's soul. "Are you interested? What do you care who we are, if you have nothing left to live for?" One of the girls grinned. "And yet," persisted Lucy. "Well, we have plenty of time," Angelica sighed. "Perhaps we should satisfy your curiosity." At that moment, Aunt Betty and Jack were at last studying the book. Aunt Betty carefully flipped through the yellow pages, reading the names of the creatures and their characteristics. Ta'ak, waterman, mermaid. "Aunt Betty, is all this stuff really real?" Jack asked with his eyes wide open. Aunt Betty looked at him like a fool, rounded her eyes and answered, "Son, you'd better listen to yourself at last." Jack tried. He tried very hard indeed to listen to himself. Had he ever noticed any oddities, any abilities? He had. In fact, he had, but he kept making excuses for them. Jack had just turned 8 and Katie 4 when their parents were killed in an accident. A trivial, ridiculous one. Jack had lost his second father that day. His birth father had died when the boy was 2 and he barely remembered him. A year and a half later, his mother remarried and Katie was born. For 4 years, the family lived happily, until this happiness was destroyed by a driver who fell asleep at the wheel and flew into the oncoming traffic. The kids didn't end up in an orphanage. They were taken in by their mother's sister, Casey, a woman who was bossy, rude, and pedantic to the point of being creepy. Casey had no children of her own, and in fact she disliked small children and didn't consider them human. Jack tried to hold himself together for his sister's sake, even crying only at night, quietly, with his face pressed against the pillow, for which he was mercilessly punished in the morning when Casey found tear stains on the snow-white pillowcases. The more time passed, the more Jack felt that he and Valley had no one but each other. He guarded his sister like a Cerberus, taking her to the daycare center before school, picking her up in the evenings, making sure she had enough to eat, giving her her portion if her aunt suddenly clamped down on the sweet bits for the children. That day, Auntie fed them soup. As usual, a bluish, liquid, pale, tasteless mass floated in their plates. Jack, scooping up another spoonful, habitually counted the drawings in it and tried to find at least a piece of meat. "What are you looking for?" Cassie shouted. "You want meat? Do I have to waste meat on you backstabbers?" "No, Casey, I'm not looking for meat." Jack excused himself, tucking his head into his shoulders in anticipation of a spanking. "Meat? They give you meat at daycare," Katie said in a ringing voice. "You eat meat at daycare." Casey angrily threw the ladle into the sink and it fell on the plates, one of which shattered. Naturally, this was accompanied by a loud clinking noise. Kathy shuddered in surprise and caught her hand on a plate, which flipped over and toppled to the floor, pouring a muddy slurry on a brand new snow-white Turkish palace. Casey's face turned red with anger. She grinned, clenched her fists so tightly that her knuckles turned white, and went straight at Kathy with those fists. "You little brat, my new palace. I'm gonna bathe your face in this soup." In a split second, Jack jumped up from the table and darted between his sister and the furious aunt, put his hands out in front of his face and closed his eyes, imagining the aunt flying away. Surprisingly, it was as if Casey was actually thrown back by an invisible blast wave. Dumbfounded by this turn of events, the aunt was silent, sitting on the floor, rubbing her bruised heel. Jack stared at his shaking hands in bewilderment, unable to understand how he had managed to push the darling, tall Casey away from him. Finally coming to her senses, the aunt rose to her feet and looked at Jack and wagged her finger sternly at him. "Just like his father, just as queer. Look at me." Then a similar thing happened at an older age. I don't know where in the most critical moments, inhuman, unreal strength came from. In teenage boy fights, Jack sometimes used the same technique he used with Casey when he was a kid. And then there was intuition. It often played tricks on Jack, and he knew where he had to go, but he didn't know why. He knew what he needed to do, but didn't understand why he needed to do it. This often helped him in his work, but often hindered him. Apparently, it was the lack of skills and knowledge, as well as the lack of ability to apply his abilities. That was the case when he met Lucy. His feet had carried him to the victim's interrogation in the perinatal center, although it should have been done by his partner. And now his inner feeling not only told him, it literally shouted that he had let Lucy go alone for nothing. "I think I found it. Navy, Jack, Angelica's a Navi. I beg your pardon, I was thinking." Jack woke up to Aunt Betty's loud voice. "Navia," I said. In Slavic mythology, a Navia is an undead creature, something between a vampire and a zombie. In life, a Navia was either a black witch or just a horribly evil person, so they are cursed after death. The dark essence of the Navia can exist without a body, but they need to take on some sort of human form to fully exist. Many thousands of years ago, the Navi were cursed by your ancestors, the Slavic Magi, to eternal torment of hunger. A variety of Navia Nochnitsa feeds on the life force of newborn babies. For her, it is her favorite treat. Usually Navia Nochnitsa, also called Krixa, does not finish the baby. He just gets sick and cries constantly. But often she cannot control herself, and the baby dies. In pre-Christian times, young mothers sewed amulets of little dolls from Nochnitsa, impregnating the fabric with thistle decoction. Today, of course, all this is long forgotten. Wait. What about the dead girl found in the vacant lot? So she came back to life? Aunt Betty shook her head. "I don't know. There's not much written here about nabobs. There is more. They can turn into bats like vampires, and you can kill them trivially, as any undead by cutting off the head or an aspen stake in the heart." Aunt Betty's story was interrupted by a phone call. It was Jack's cell phone. He pulled his smartphone out of his pocket, glanced at the screen. "Sam, his partner." "Yeah, Nick," Jack answered. "Where did you disappear to?" A young man's low voice came through the phone. "Personal business. Very confusing," Jack replied evasively. "We have a dead woman in the courtyard of the perinatal center," Sam reported briefly, which sent shivers down Jack's spine. Inside, He was suddenly sure it wasn't Lucy, but he also had a feeling that Lucy was in danger too. "I'm on my way," Jack answered and dropped the call. "Lucy," Aunt Betty muttered with white lips. "It's not Lucy," Jack said, rising from his chair. "I'm coming with you." Aunt Betty, holding her stiff back, rose to her feet, determined to follow Jack. "Where are you going?" "It could be dangerous." "You're not taking on a gang?" Aunt Betty grinned. "The course isn't hers, I can feel it, but Lucy isn't safe either. Why did we let her go? You're the one who didn't insist. You're a man. You let your beloved go and sit here with an old lady reading books. I'd have read it all myself." Aunt Betty rattled on endlessly as she followed Jack up the stairs, trying to keep up. "She won't come. She's been torn up by dogs. Skinheads with rebar, traitorous ice broken. Her hands were not prepared for a fight. And she didn't want to win. I'll be in her place now." Chorus. "She's floating in formalin imperfect lines, moving gradually. I've got her face, her name. The sweater's the same blue. No one noticed the switch. Her hands were in a snake hole. My head in a wasp's nest and my back in an ant pile. I'll be me of sturdier dough. I'm worthy to take this place. I do a lot of things better." Chorus. "It floats in formalin, moving gradually, in a murky white fall. I've got her face, her name. No one noticed the switch. Checking the keys in my pocket. I must be playing something wrong. I don't know who these people are. I'm smiling a little weird. They'll suspect I'm not the other one. I don't know what will happen then. I'll pretend to be sick or drunk." Chorus. "She's floating in formalin imperfect lines, moving gradually. I've got her face, her name. The sweater's the same blue. No one noticed the switch. She floats in formaldehyde, moving gradually, in a murky white fall. I've got her face, her name. No one noticed the switch. Checking the keys in my pocket." Formalin by Fleur. "Oh, poor girl, so young, so pretty," wailed Aunt Betty, throwing up her hands as she stood over Nancy's lifeless body. Meanwhile, Jack looked for Lucy's car, which was not in the parking lot behind the perinatal center. In fact, he wondered how, practically in broad daylight, there were no witnesses to the death of the woman whose body the medical examiner was currently working on. "Steve, what is it? What do you think?" Jack asked impatiently. "No signs of violent death. Looks like cardiac arrest," shrugged the overweight young man, rising from his squatting position. "More details after the autopsy, as usual." "Who's that?" "Steve, thank your lover's ancestors for that." Angelica laughed, and her laughter was instantly echoed by Kira and Lada. "We were locked away. Our essences have waited 1,000 years for this moment. The archaeologists broke the seal the surviving Magi had put on our crypt. Geographically, we were hidden in the dungeons. We were set free. Hungry, embittered, disembodied. We wanted to live. We wanted to eat. All the time. We have the curse of eternal hunger, Lucy, thanks also to your friend's ancestors. So we scoured the world for food, studying your life, which has changed so much since that time. We stopped here, found the right shells in the form of sisters, fed ourselves so that we would have the strength to reincarnate, and now we are alive." Angelica waved her hands with a smile. "Alive," Lucy grinned. "You are neither alive nor dead. You just exist. And what is life?" Angelique squinted. "What is it? Are you alive? Eating, sleeping, drinking, all a set of reflexes. You kill, betray, lie, make wars. Besides, we love, befriend, sympathize, admire the beauty of nature and works of art, create these works, dream. And you just eat to exist." Lucy squinted back at me. "Okay, I'm tired of messing with you." Angelica lifted her chin. "It's getting dark. I'll come back tomorrow and deal with you. Now I'll have to move, really, and also find another shell because I'm under suspicion because of you. In the meantime, my sisters and I will look for a place to go." Meanwhile, Jack's office was bustling with activity. He'd gotten the footage from the nearest security camera and had already studied the footage, which showed Angelica in the vicinity. Jack cringed as he watched the moment when something long, black, suction cup-like thing came out of Angelica's mouth and went up to Nancy's neck. For a few minutes, Nancy tried to break free, but in vain. and then the poor woman just collapsed exhausted onto the pavement. Sam was watching the video too, his mouth hanging open in amazement. What the fuck is that? What did she do? Jack looked up at his partner, grinned, and instead of answering his question, he said, pulling out of his desk drawer the folder with Angelica's file that Lucy had given him in the car. Find me everything about that woman. Absolutely everything. Thoroughly. What she's doing now, where she goes, and more. Maybe she's been seen around some vacant lots, abandoned buildings. Go through all our channels, including unofficial ones. The sooner the better. Take Rocky, the intern. It'll go faster together. Got it? I'll do it right. Aunt Betty was sitting on the table, spreading out rooms trying to figure out Lucy's whereabouts. Jack was busy preparing to file a case for Lucy's disappearance, even though it had been less than 24 hours, but he was hopeful that it would all work out. Sam looked at Aunt Betty incredulously as he left the office and muttered to himself, I didn't think I'd make it to 26 and end up on Babel of the Psychics. Time stretched like rubber. Aunt Betty rubbed her eyelids tiredly, scattering the rooms over and over again, and finally gave out, She's alive. That's 100%, the runes said, and I finally got a signal. Jack, too, was listening to his senses, as luck would have it. He didn't understand how to read his visions, which flashed before his eyes in ragged pictures, where he saw only dark walls and smelled dampness. His intuition had decided to take a nap that night, too. Dawn glimmered outside the window. Jack paced from wall to wall in his office, annoying Aunt Betty, who was already tired. Stop looming. You're distracting me, aren't you? Aunt Betty, I'm looking at an unfinished building. I feel that Lucy's not far away, but where is it? How can you feel it, see it? My ancestors saw it, didn't they? They did, son. You have no experience, and your power is not what the Magi had back then. I'm a woman. The gift is passed on mostly to men. Men like me are rare, and there was no one to teach me, so I can't do much. I can feel Lucy around here somewhere too. She's alive, that's for sure, but she's weak. Save your strength, son. You'll need it when you fight the undead. We can't do it without you. Finally, Sam literally flew into the office. I think I found it, Timek. The local junkies have often seen this woman with two others like her in the abandoned factory. In the last couple days, they've been frequenting the place, like they're getting ready for something. Also, there's a car hidden in the bushes. Jack and Aunt Betty looked at each other meaningfully. Let's go. The old woman jumped up from her chair, picking up the runes from the table. Aunt Betty, it's dangerous. Jack tried to talk some sense into Aunt Betty. Of course it's dangerous to go alone without me, Aunt Betty exclaimed confidently. The golden dawn brightly illuminated the grain buildings of the abandoned factory. The area had long since been overgrown with wild maples and tall weeds. The once paved roads between the shops and the former office building mottled with holes, grass sticking out of the gaps. All four of them, Jack, Sam, Rocky, the intern, and Aunt Betty, stepped out of the car they parked in front of the gate. Aunt Betty looked around the area and took a deep intake of air with her nose. Aunt Betty and Jack were clutching long knives that could be used to cut off the heads of the undead, and they had also brought small but sharp aspen stakes. Aunt Betty had kept it all at the apartment they'd stopped at before they went to rescue Lucy. Do you smell dead meat? We guessed it. They're here. And Lucy's here. Aunt Betty smiled. Jack could smell it. Yes, now he could smell the foul, sweet, sour odor that stung his eyes. It seemed to be wafting from the hangar, apparently a former parking lot for the plant's vehicles. He also felt that he had to hurry. Anxiety squeezed his chest. I feel it. Let's go, Aunt Betty. Wait, you mean you're going to take the criminals with that old lady? Woman who doesn't have as much strength and energy as the young ones. Sam tactfully hinted at Aunt Betty's age, to which she laughed softly in response. Son, Aunt Betty clapped Nikita on the shoulder. I have more energy than you and this young man put together. Rocky hummed silently and didn't argue. Sam and Rocky, guard the entrance, and Aunt Betty and I are going in. Jack ordered Jack and gestured for Aunt Betty to follow him. They entered the building and the smell became unbearable. Ahead of them was a door leading into a long hallway. Jack and Aunt Betty gingerly stepped into the dark abyss, trying not to breathe loudly and constantly looking around. Jack lit a lantern and walked ahead, followed by Aunt Betty. Suddenly, there was a shout from Rocky and the sound of a struggle outside. Jack and Aunt Betty looked at each other. "Go to the boys. I'll go after Lucy," Aunt Betty said confidently, and seeing Jack's hesitation, she added, "I can handle it. I'm more experienced than you." Jack rushed out, leaving Aunt Betty the lantern, which she took in her other hand, free of the knife. Aunt Betty made her way down the long hallway, which also revealed a door at the end. The door was locked from the outside with a deadbolt. Aunt Betty opened the deadbolt, pushed the door open, and the lantern beam struck Lucy, who was lying exhausted on the dirty mattress. Lucy's hands were tied behind her back, and there were ropes around her ankles. "Oh, my girl. Now, be patient," wailed Aunt Betty and rushed to Lucy, who smiled weakly in return. "They haven't come back yet," Lucy mumbled. Aunt Betty began to cut the ropes that bound Lucy's hands with a knife, and she did not immediately notice Lucy's eyes slowly rounding. "Behind you," shouted Lucy, and Aunt Betty felt someone very strong grab her by the shoulder and pull her toward her. Jack ran outside and found Rocky's trainee writhing on the ground, a black-haired girl with a long black tongue hanging out of her mouth and sucking on his neck, and Sam trying to fight off a second girl of almost identical appearance. Jack rushed to Rocky, pulling an aspen stake out of his pocket, swung it around, took a good look at the heart, and plunged it right in before the undead could get a chance to regain their senses. Where had the strength come from? The stake pierced the girl's body. She howled as she released it and jumped up, arching her back. The second girl, realizing her sister was dying, squealed and rushed towards Jack. Surprisingly, his movements were precise and accurate, as if he had done it hundreds of times before. Jack deftly dodged the furious undead, grabbed the knife in his other hand, and in one steady motion blew the attacker's head off. How did he know how to move? Where did he get that reaction? Jack stared at the two defeated foes in bewilderment, his knife lowered and his breathing heavy. Shit, there's only two of them. Where's the third? Jack turned his head toward the hangar. Lucy, Aunt Betty. Aunt Betty didn't even get a chance to scream. She dropped the knife in surprise and struggled desperately to keep the black-haired girl from reaching her neck. Angelica grinned and spat directly into Aunt Betty's open mouth. She spit the navy bone down the older woman's throat. Another way the Navy could kill. Aunt Betty wheezed, grabbed her throat, and began desperately gulping for air with her mouth. Nothing worked. The woman gasped and sank to the floor, while Angelica stood over her and smirked heavily. Angelica didn't see that Lucy had already freed herself from the ropes, because Aunt Betty had already cut them. Lucy quietly picked up a knife from the floor, swung it around, and gathering all her strength, slashed at the undead's neck. Angelica's head, like a ball, rolled into the corner, and her body fell to the floor with a clatter. Aunt Betty. No, Aunt Betty, don't die. Lucy rushed to her neighbor and began to shake her by the shoulders. Her strength was almost gone. Would she be able to save her? Lucy closed her eyes, concentrated, and put her shaking hands on Aunt Betty's neck. Don't leave me, Aunt Betty. I already lost my mom when I was a baby, and my grandmother is gone, and you're going to leave me. I won't let you. Her hands were on fire. She was giving up the rest of her energy so that she wouldn't be alone. The power suddenly came from inside her, a spasm in her lower abdomen that made Lucy shriek. But her hands were able to do what they were meant to do. Jack ran into the damp, dark room just as Aunt Betty was coughing desperately and Lucy was slumping to the floor, unconscious. The enemy had been defeated, and that was the main thing. 9 months later. Lucy, it's a girl. You've got a girl, announced Harry joyfully, laying the newborn on the exhausted Lucy's stomach. The pink wrinkled lump rumbled, eliciting a smile from the new mother. How beautiful, Lucy murmured. Of course she is, grinned Leslie, picking up the baby, a beautiful, healthy girl. Of course she is, smiled Lucy. Suddenly, there was a commotion from the next delivery room. What's going on? Lucy asked excitedly. Acute hypoxia, shouted the voice of Victoria, neonatologist, who delivered the second woman who gave birth at the same time with Lucy. Bring me that baby, Lucy asked Leslie. Why, wondered Leslie, Victoria will do it now. She won't. Bring it, Lucy repeated insistently. Leslie obediently left the delivery room and headed for the next room. After a short negotiation, she returned with the baby, who was not breathing, in her arms. Lucy, propped up on one elbow, put her hand on the baby, concentrated, and, after a couple of minutes and a few smooth movements of her hand, the baby cried out loudly, informing the surprised inhabitants of the delivery room that he was alive. "So that's how you did it all the time," muttered a dazed Harry. Lucy smiled and nodded. "Just don't tell anyone. I'm doing it now. And then there will be her." Lucy nodded meaningfully at her daughter lying quietly. "She'll be much stronger than me. Maybe she won't just heal. She'll change the world. Hopefully for the better."